Very good afternoon, Jest. Very warm welcome to this webinar about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. Literally warm because it's so good to finally shed the fleeces. My name is Josh Hillman. I'm the Director of Education at the Nuffield Foundation. We're a charitable foundation that funds research, development and innovation across education, welfare and justice. And just so you know who you all are, we have a few hundred local authority advisors, speech and language therapists, people from schools, trusts and federations taking part from all corners of the country, something we could never have achieved in person, I don't think. I really wish I could see you all, but we've had to opt for the alternative form of Zoom, where you're not postage stamps on the screen, tiny little postage stamps. So sadly, attendees will not be visible or audible during the webinar, and you'll just have to put up with looking at me and the other speakers. By the way, we have closed captions in English, which you can access by clicking on the CC icon, which is on the screen near the Q&A. For some time, early years education has been a big theme for Nuffield, and in particular, we've highlighted the central role that oral language plays in early childhood. It facilitates social and emotional development. It provides the building blocks for the development of later literacy skills, and it also enables smooth transition to the primary classroom, building children's capacity to benefit from all aspects of school life. Now, these foundations are not laid equally. Gaps in language skills and vocabulary between children from lower and higher income families, on average of course, are already apparent at 18 months old. And by the time they start school, children from the poorest fifth of families are 19 months behind those from the richest fifth in terms of their vocabulary. Disparities like these have persistent effects throughout education and into employment. Now, enter COVID-19 and the abrupt and prolonged disruption to opportunities for preschool children to develop their language skills. We've seen early years education providers closed or restricted in what they could offer for a period, and some families have since been quite reluctant for their children to return to or take up places in nursery schools. The latest DFE data shows attendance in early years settings is still lower than usual at 78%. Meanwhile, young children's lives were for a long period largely home-based, and they missed many of the informal ways in which language is developed, socializing with wider family and friends, absorbing ambient language in school, in shops, schools, buses, playgrounds, going to libraries or museums or having days out. Now, the research that Nuffield has funded during the pandemic has shown that young children in lower income families were hit hardest of all, with fewer educational resources or development activities in the home, and lower rates of engagement with parents struggling with poverty or trying to juggle work and caring responsibilities. The development of all children entering reception in the current school year and next school year, but particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, has been impoverished by these disruptions and the more limited exposure to language in formal and informal settings. We know that teachers are particularly worried about this. Recent research from the Education Endowment Foundation shows that 96% of school surveyed last autumn were concerned about the impact of the pandemic on language and communication skills. Since then, we've had another lockdown, continued restrictions on socializing, so this is not a problem that's restricted to just one cohort of school starters. Now, I've been talking here about large-scale research, but if I could see all the tiny postage stamps on the screen, I'm sure I would be seeing lots of nodding heads from those who are working on the ground. And this is where the Nuffield Early Language Intervention comes in. NELI was designed on the basis of scientific research by a team of developmental psychologists led by Professors Margaret Snowling and Charles Hume, who are now at the University of Oxford. It's been refined through scaled up trials over the past decade. The program's been shown to be highly effective, 3 months average progress for pupils, potentially more for poorer children, and the EF's highest security padlock for robustness of findings. Program focuses on vocabulary knowledge, narrative skills, and active listening, and is particularly targeted at those with relatively poor oral language skills, and it's easily delivered by teaching assistants. Now, in recognition of the value of NELI, the DfE has made it a core part of its recovery programme to support disadvantaged children who have been falling behind before they've even started school. So this year, reception pupils in the latest count is 6,672 state-funded primary schools across England have benefited. And the next short presentation will cover the rationale and evidence behind that programme and the experience of this current rollout. Professor Hume wasn't able to make this webinar, but Sarah Tillotson, who's the programme manager at EF, leading on early years language and literacy, she's kindly stepped in to cover this. Importantly, the DfE has recently announced additional funding to expand the rollout to all interested schools for the 2021-2 school year, so next school year. And all resources and full training for teaching assistants are provided for free. Schools can register online at teachneli.org. We'll put that everywhere between now and the end of July 2021. Programmes delivered by a consortium of organisations, which we're leading at the Nuffield Foundation, but with the central involvement of on the training and development side by Charles Hume and his colleagues at Oxford University. And Oxford University Press are producing and delivering the resources. And in a brief second session, Jane Harley, who's the Policy and Partnerships Director at OUP, will briefly describe the opportunity this year. And also delighted that we'll then hear a case study of the implementation of NELI from Connie Racket, who is the Education Improvement Advisor at Nottinghamshire County Council. And then finally, we'll be leaving plenty of time for questions for this panel, as well as Victoria Parks, who's the team leader in the DfE's Early Years Quality and Outcomes Division. She's kindly agreed to join us for that. If you would like to ask a question to the speakers, please can you do that by typing your question into the Q&A box, not the chat. And if your question is directed to a particular speaker, it would really help me if you just highlighted that in your question. I have a sneaky feeling with the number of people we've got here, we won't get through all of the questions, but have no fear, put them in, and if we don't cover them within the hour, we will deal with them at a later stage. In fact, we're setting up an FAQ page on teachneli.org, and all that you ask will be used as fodder for that page, so we'll get free labour from you. And just to anticipate a couple of questions, on the, first of all, yes, the slides will be available after the event, and I should also say the webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards too. And another question, this is not a one-off, we're planning on having other webinars with different cast of characters, slightly different angles, including one on Thursday the 10th of June, 3:30 to 4:30, with even more detail on programme implementation in schools. And at least one school case study. Finally, at the end, for those who can stay an extra 5 minutes, we have a video case study produced by the OUP from Riders Hayes School. So that would be a good backdrop for your sandwich, assuming I haven't served this purpose for early eaters. And we'll also be making that video available on the Teach NELI site. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk about this year's programme.
Thanks, Josh. So, hi everyone, I'm Sarah Tilton. I'm from the EF, as Josh outlined, and I'm going to talk about the rationale for NELI, the evidence that NELI can have an impact on pupils' outcomes, and give you an overview of what the programme entails on behalf of colleagues at the University of Oxford. So, as lots of you on the call will already know, that language skills at 5 are amongst the best predictors of short and long-term educational outcomes, and not just educational outcomes, but they correlate really well with good well-being and employment opportunities. So it's really important that everybody is trying their best to improve children's language development so that by the end of the early years foundation stage, they're in a really good position for accessing education as they move up through school. Success in literacy particularly relies on the development of language skills. There's been lots of evidence that suggests this, but Kate Kane's house model on the right there, I think, really depicts this really well. If you look at the bottom, the yellow boxes, well, yellowy orange boxes, highlight aspects of language are items that involve language processing, and highlight them as the kind of foundation of later reading comprehension. So another reason why we need to get children's language development on track, so that they can succeed at literacy as they move through school. And reception is the key year for targeted support for language. Language development follows a really typical trajectory, but the age that children kind of meet those milestones can vary quite a lot within the early years age range. But that kind of variability kind of settles down around the reception age and makes it a really key time to target children to support their language development. There's lots of kind of evidence that shows this, but children at 2 years old who are found to have a language delay, about 70% of those children go on to for their language delay to be resolved quite naturally without any intervention. So it makes it harder to kind of provide targeted intensive support before children are kind of 4 and 5, before that settling down of that language development has happened. But by reception, there's about 30% of children who, through screening, we can kind of capture and we can provide that additional target support at that age. And as kind of Josh kind of outlined, there's emerging evidence to suggest that the pandemic is having an impact on children's language development. Well, not the pandemic, the kind of social distancing policies that have sat around the pandemic response. This study on the right here is some survey data from an EEF funded funded research that looked at, that surveyed reception staff, so teachers and teaching assistants supporting reception pupils this academic year, surveyed them in the autumn term. So these are children who had that impact of social distancing on their nursery education. And you can see the really high rate of concern there for children's language development. So there's an extra reason why we should be supporting children's language development right now. And the EEF has a resource called the Early Years Toolkit, which highlights the best bets for what schools and early year settings should be kind of concentrating on to improve children's outcomes. And you can see that communication and language has the biggest impact, or communication and language approaches, so those ways that staff can support language development, those things have the most promise. They could potentially have the biggest impact on children's outcomes. And what's quite typical of the education evidence space is that we kind of have lots of evidence on correlations, so we understand what things are the best predictors of education and development, but we have a lot less solutions for school staff to use to improve children's outcomes. So there's not many programs that change adult and children's behaviour and actually translate to children's outcomes. But this is what's quite different about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. It's kind of based on all of that evidence that I've shown you. So it was an evidence-informed programme when it was developed in the 2000s. And then it's gone through 3 rounds of rigorous RCTs. So it has been explicitly evaluated to see if it can deliver that impact on children's outcomes and see that behaviour change. And the latest trial that was reported by the EEF last summer found that on average, children who received the Nuffield Early Language Intervention made 3 months of additional progress. And that was when it was delivered to 100 settings at the same time. So really good, confident findings. And the reason why we have that kind of level of confidence is the EEF gives all its evaluations a padlock rating. So that's where it's rating the evaluation, the quality of the evaluation, the quality of the RCT, and it was given a 5 padlock rating, which means that we have a lot of confidence that that 3-month progress outcome wasn't because of any other variables. They were well controlled. So looks like the programme delivered that result. And so we have a lot of confidence that those outcomes could be found for other schools who deliver the programme in the same way. A really important finding in that report was also that 3 months progress was found for pupils who have English as additional language. This is equivalent to pupils who are native English speakers but who had delayed language. So it's good for all types of pupils. And we saw some emerging evidence that the impact on language was transferring to children's literacy skills. So we saw 2 months progress on early word reading as well. So it's predominantly a language programme, but we've seen some transfer that it supports literacy outcomes as well. And some more recent evaluation that the EEF has conducted, we've evaluated all of the programmes that are within, we've done some evaluation of all our evaluations and found that the Nuffield Early Language Intervention seems to be one of the best bets for closing the disadvantage gap. So it's great for those pupils as well. And kind of all of this evidence has enabled us to say that we think the Nuffield Early Language Intervention is the most well-evidenced oral language programme probably available in the world, but definitely available to schools in England. We know that this isn't going to be the only solution for supporting language, but it's definitely the best bet that schools, that is available to schools now that can be taken up, and that's why it's kind of got the support of the DfE to enable that scale up across the country. So I'm going to share some more detail about the Nuffield Early Language Intervention now. What is it? It's a scripted programme with activities that primarily support children's listening skills, vocabulary development, narrative skills, and kind of in the latter half of the programme, the latter 10 weeks of the programme, early literacy skills are supported as well, where there's activities that support letter sound knowledge and phonological awareness. And the programme has been developed by the University of Oxford, but it's taken lots of those really key ideas that speech and language therapists have been using for a really long time, and it's tried to package those up so they can be delivered by schools as a wave 2 intervention. So it can target pupils who are showing delayed levels of language. It's not for children who have developmental language disorder, who really need bespoke specialist support from a speech and language therapist. It's a wave 2 intervention to try and support schools, but support schools to support children with who are showing delayed language development. In terms of how it's delivered, I've mentioned already that it's a targeted language intervention, so it's for about 4 to 6 children per reception class, and it's an intensive 20-week programme. So there are 3 small group sessions that are held each week, and each one's about 30 minutes long, and 2 one-to-one sessions per child per week, and those are about 15 minutes long. And this is the overview of what a group session looks like. And as you can see, lots of really key activities that speech and language therapists have been using all of the time in their language groups, but enabling some of those things to be delivered by school staff. So there's an introduction section where there's a greeting song and listening activities, really typical things of a speech and language therapist language group. And those listening games kind of are replaced by phonological awareness and letter sound activities in the latter 10 weeks. So just kind of those 3 minutes kind of revision on those things. And then there's a big chunk of 10 minutes that focus on vocabulary. Some of that is reinforcing vocabulary that's taught in a previous session, and then where new vocabulary is also introduced. And then there's 10 minutes on narrative activities, where the adult models orally telling a story with props, and then encourages children to retell or summarise the story or tell their own story based on the kind of theme and their experiences. And then the session is rounded up with a plenary, so there's a bit of an overview of what they've learned, and children are kind of praised for their positive contribution. If you are interested in seeing what these group sessions look like in practice, there's a kind of best bits video of some of the group sessions available on the Teach NELI site, and I think Molly's going to put the link in the chat there so you can access that if you want to. And there's video, a kind of a best bets video of the one-to-one sessions as well, so you can see what those look like. To enable the team to deliver the Nuffield Early Language nationally at scale and also in a socially distanced manner, the EEF funded the University of Oxford to develop an online training model so that as many schools could access it as possible. And the online training programme is on the platform FutureLearn, which is a platform that ordinarily offers online training, but the content was developed by Oxford University using the same kind of package of materials that was developed for the face-to-face training that experienced the evaluations. And the training involves 3 linked courses and a delivery support hub. So course 1 is called Language Fundamentals, and this is a course that highlights the importance of language for development, how children develop language and how to support it. And the second course is called Delivering Nuffield Early Language Intervention, and that goes into detail about how to deliver the group and one-to-one sessions. And altogether those 2 courses take about 8 to 10 hours to complete. It's the equivalent of completing 2 face-to-face sessions, which would ordinarily have happened kind of using the face-to-face model. So we recommend, what's good about this online model is that there's no live elements to the training. Staff work through those at their own pace, but we recommend that schools find time for the people who are training to complete it during school time, so they're kind of paid for that training. It's not done in their own time at home, because that's ordinarily what you'd have done if it was a face-to-face model, so we should treat that the same here. There's a third course, and this one's just a short course of 2 hours, and this is, we encourage people to make sure they complete that element of the course before they reach that 10-week aspect of the delivery of NELI. And that course is called Teaching Phonological Awareness and Letter Sound Knowledge, so it just supports people with understanding how to deliver that extra aspect in the latter half of the 10 weeks of the programme. And these online courses are monitored by a team of NELI mentors, so people who are experts in the programme. And in all of the courses, there's moments where people can ask questions or make comments, and the NELI mentors are kind of observing that, and they're there to kind of respond. But because it's a social platform, other learners might respond to people's queries as well and develop that really lovely dialogue that supports learning. But there's the NELI Delivery Support Hub as well, which is a bigger kind of forum piece to ask those questions, but it's got lots of really good delivery support there. So lots of videos of delivery of NELI in practice and support for assessment as well. In terms of who the programme should be, so who should be involved in the delivery of the programme. So as I said, it's a programme for reception children. There is a version of NELI that's been developed for nursery, but it's quite different to this. That's a language enrichment programme. This is a language intervention. So it's really designed specifically for targeted support for reception children. And we recommend that the children who experience the intervention are those who with the lowest levels of language in the class. And to support staff with this, the team at Oxford have developed a tablet-based assessment tool called Language Screen. We know that NELI is a really intensive intervention. It takes a lot of time, both on the part of the child and the member of staff to deliver the programme. So we want to make sure that children who are receiving the programme are the right children, and the children who can get the most out of that intensity of support. So that's why as part of the kind of scale-up offer, we have ensured that schools have access to Language Screen if they want to use it. So this tablet-based screener takes 10 minutes per child to deliver, and it involves 4 subtests. So there's an expressive language element, a listening comprehension element, a receptive language element, and a sentence repetition element. And you can see there on the right the kind of output from those assessments. So you can see that children receive a score for each of the subtests and an overall score, and it's a standardised score. There's a percentile rank offered, and then a really clear description of what that score means, and then an alert kind of traffic light system. So it's really clear to to school staff which children the screening tool would recommend to take part in the intervention. We think it'd be really beneficial if schools had the opportunity to discuss the outcome of the screening with speech and language therapists, particularly if say a child with developmental language disorder has been flagged up, and they need some kind of confidence about whether to offer them NELI or not, because we imagine that the bespoke programme that the speech and language therapist has offered is the right thing for that child, and additional intervention that takes them out of the class might not be the appropriate thing. So having speech and language therapy input on deciding who receives the intervention will be really beneficial to schools. And I think it would be beneficial for speech and language therapists to see the types of children who are being flagged on that, so they understand if the levels of support in their local area are meeting the needs that are being flagged. I've mentioned what the training involves, but I've not said about who should take part in the training or delivery of the programme. So in the research trials, the teaching assistant or early years educator who was linked to the reception classroom delivered the programme. And so that's who we would recommend takes on the main delivery element of the programme to pupils. But that could be someone else in the school if you've got a higher level teaching assistant who predominantly delivers all your interventions across schools. They might be an appropriate person, or it might be that you've got a specialist early years educator who's got specialism in supporting oral language and they're teaching nursery, so they might be the ones who would be best delivering interventions. So it's up to schools, but we would recommend the teaching assistant or early educator who's linked to the reception class is delivering the programme for their pupils. And we want them to complete all of those 3 elements of the courses. But we also require reception class teachers to complete the language fundamentals course. So everyone has got that really solid understanding of language development and how it's best supported. And we encourage them to, if they want to also take course 2 and course 3, but it's not required, it's optional and it's there if people want to. Schools are required to nominate a NELI lead for their school. We usually suggest that that's someone on the senior leadership team, so it could be an inclusion or a SENCO, inclusion lead or a SENCO, or it could be the early years coordinator. So they also might be the reception class teacher and already taking the training, but they also might not be. They might be the nursery teacher who's the early years lead, and therefore they may opt into taking some elements of the courses if they want to. And when schools register for NELI, they kind of can opt in or opt out of the training there. And I thought it'd be useful to share where NELI delivery is up to for this academic year. So as just kind of highlighted at the beginning, there's lots of partners involved, but the EEF took on the role of supporting delivery across partners this academic year, and now it's been handed back to the Nuffield Foundation, who have kind of organised a more functional home for the programme. So it's been quite a volatile year, I'm sure you all agree. And when we first kind of set this up, we expected to maybe reach about 25% of schools. And there's about a 4-month lead-in time that we need to order the physical materials for children. So we guessed that we'd maybe reach about 25% of schools and ordered those materials and then started recruitment. And as we went through that recruitment process, we found that NELI was really popular and people really wanted it. And so we responded as best we could to expand our reach. And in the end, 40% of schools who have a reception pupil signed up to the programme, which is incredible. But it meant that schools are kind of on different timelines as we were kind of telling them when they got the programme and when they got some of the materials. But because of the closures in January and March, it's kind of realigned everybody. So we had that recruitment piece in the autumn term. Then in the November and December, some schools started being able to screen their children's language. About 40% of schools managed to do some assessments before Christmas. And then when schools returned in March, the rest of the kind of language assessments were completed then. Schools received their physical materials before Christmas or after Christmas. And then in January and February, we made the online training materials available to school staff, and people predominantly worked through those materials while schools were closed to most pupils. And then from March onwards, they were then ready to deliver the programme to children. There were some people still kind of tying up their assessments and choosing the children to take part in the programme, but we completed a survey recently that showed people let the children settle for about 2 weeks and then started the programme. So most people are kind of on with delivering the programme now. Well, unfortunately, the 20-week programme does no longer fit in the academic year because of those closures, and we're encouraging school staff to complete that full kind of 20-week dose with those NELI children when they come back to school in September as year 1 pupils. And then when they've delivered those 20 weeks, they're encouraged to rescreen the children's language using Language Screen so they can see the benefit that it's had on their pupils. But you could also, there's enough tests to screen the whole of that cohort again, so you can actually see if the school and the programme have been successful in kind of closing the language gap. If you would like to find out which schools in your local area have registered for NELI this year, that's available on the .gov website, and I think Molly's going to post the link to that website in the chat so you can access that. As I said, we're expecting some NELI delivery to go into year 1. If schools feel that their current member of trained staff can't deliver that and they need to train up a new member of staff, they can email the address that's on the screen there, nelly.r@education.oxford.ac.uk, and request for a new person to access training so they can complete that full programme. And I'm sure you're all thinking and wondering what additional support there may be offered, will maybe be offered for this cohort of schools to support with delivering the programme to their next cohort of reception pupils. We haven't finalised that yet. We haven't decided what's available and when, but we'll email the schools when we're ready to share that information, and that'll be on the Teach NELI website for everyone to understand as well. And I thought I'd also flag here that the EEF have funded an evaluation of the scale up, but unfortunately we've had to cancel the impact evaluation piece, which is the piece where we'd find out what impact it's had on pupils, but the disruption to schools due to COVID has caused us to cancel that element. But we are committed to completing an implementation and process evaluation, and that's been delivered by RAND Europe. Okay, I'll pass now to Jane to kind of highlight the NELI scale up for the coming academic year.
Hello everybody, I'm Jane Harley from Oxford University Press. We're obviously delighted to be part of this as publishing the NELI programme, and we were very involved last year in ensuring that all the materials got to schools in time. This year, in February, when the government announced the continuation of this grant-funded initiative, a further 8 million has been made available for state-funded schools in England with reception pupils to access NELI. And we're really delighted to be working with Nuffield and others to try and support the engagement of those schools and ensure that it reaches as many children as possible. We launched the portal teachneli.org early this month, and the programme is open for universal school registration on a first come, first served basis. Any eligible school can sign up. We are really keen, obviously, and I think as both Josh and Sarah have expressed, to ensure that as many schools as possible with pupils that have high free school meals and the greatest needs are given opportunity to participate alongside any other school in the country. To sign up, the process has been simplified this year, and so there is a portal, teachneli.org, which really streamlines the process and hopefully makes it very straightforward for teachers to get onto the system. First port of call really is there is lots of information within teachneli.org showing exactly all the things that Sarah has talked about, what the language screen involves, the training, the kit, lots of videos and lots of FAQs, really to ensure that every teacher is fully aware of what delivering the programme involves. Schools then enter their URN to find their school. They identify a NELI lead, having decided this is something they want to go for. They enter in how many packs are required, which is normally 1 per reception class, and also the head teacher's email. And once all that data has been entered into the portal, the head will be emailed with an MOU which outlines the terms and conditions of the programme, really again spelling out exactly what's involved in delivering, and also includes sort of signing up to taking a number of short surveys to feed back on where the NELI groups are in terms of delivery, because obviously with a 20-week intensive programme, it's really important to complete the whole thing. If any school has any difficulties, we have a full support service to help with registration or any other issues. And the really exciting news is we already have over 1,000 schools signed up and a further 1,000 schools working through the process. As schools enter their data, numbers will be released in batches. So schools may not hear immediately that they've got on the programme, because we're obviously anxious to make sure that we have the right number of training, supports and kits. So there will be batches of emails going out to alert schools that they have got on the programme. We're working very hard, obviously, and this is part of that initiative, to raise awareness of the opportunity and to really ensure that all schools are really supported in taking up NELI if they choose to do so. And OUP, we're calling schools to talk about the initiative and support the sign-up process. And there are huge numbers, as I said, of videos and FAQs to support as well on the site. Do you want to go to the next slide, Sarah? So just to look at the timescales for this year, and fingers crossed that it will be a rollout as planned and we won't have any kind of closures or other interruptions that clearly make life very difficult for everybody. The portal is open for registration until the end of term, and we're really urging schools to sign up as early as possible to avoid disappointment. There will, obviously, with the 8 million, there is a finite number of training and kits, so we're keen to get people signing up fast. In the autumn term, schools will be invited to enrol for the training and invited to register for the language screen, and ideally they'll do that in September, really to be ready to start. They can complete the training and the language screen assessments when they wish in the autumn term, and obviously at the beginning of term they'll have other things on their plate. The aim is to, we will be getting the kits to schools in November, and we're aiming for as soon as after half term as possible. And we very much hope that that will allow all schools to work through the training, ideally with the kits in hand, before they actually start the implementation process in January. The 20 weeks will fit in between January and July, and then in sort of June, July, there'll be a chance to take the language screen again to do a review and assess progress. If you'd like to go to the next slide.
Jane,
We'll be seeing a bit.
Sorry, Jane, I'm going to need to cut you off pretty soon, because we do also want to hear from the local authority perspective. Yeah.
Of course. There'll be a video at the end of Riders Hayes, who is a fantastic advocate for NELI, and we have a network of advocate schools that we're setting up, which allows you to be able to see how schools, other schools who are already using NELI are using it. And I just wanted to announce that we did also just win, NELI won the Education Resources Award for Special Educational Needs, so another testament to its value. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Sorry to cut you short.
That's all right.
Connie, can you give us the perspective as briefly as you can from the local authority side of things?
Yeah, of course. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Connie Racket. I'm an Education Improvement Advisor with Nottinghamshire County Council, and I lead on disadvantage. So quickly, just some context from Nottinghamshire. 285 primary schools, of which 259 are eligible to register. So that's not counting our junior schools. Like other local authorities, our education improvement team focuses on improving outcomes for children and young people. But as we know, the pandemic has had and continues to have a disproportionate impact on children living in poverty. So the team's work with schools has become even more focused, particularly supporting those schools in areas of high deprivation. So my role within the team is to improve both the provision and outcomes for children who are eligible for free school meals. So I advise, support and train school leaders in the best ways to do this. And that involves ensuring that leaders make evidence-based decisions. So when the catch-up funding and the free NELI programme was announced, I was delighted and wanted to encourage as many schools as possible to sign up. I was aware that NELI has a proven track record of improving language and communication skills for young children at such a crucial time in their development. The fact that the programme is aimed at those children who need it most, the most disadvantaged, meant that I was the member of the team who could oversee it. We've talked about and heard about the word gap that exists nationally, and that's reflected here in Nottinghamshire. And children who live in poverty leave our early years settings nearly 5 months behind their peers in terms of attainment, which increases as they move through school, that gap. So there's a real need for early intervention and focused work. So Sarah's already pulled up my next slide, which is great. So every local authority engages with their schools in different ways for different reasons. And in Nottinghamshire, the pandemic actually brought us all closer together, and we had much more regular contact with all of our school leaders. So we held regular telekits and briefings for senior leaders and provided key information in the form of weekly or twice weekly bulletins and newsletters that went out to both school leaders and governors. I was given a spotlight on disadvantage slot at the briefings and was able to publicise NELI alongside other programmes and additional funding that was available. I also delivered several training events and pupil premium consultancy during the autumn term, where I promoted and encouraged registration. Reminders to sign up before the December cut-off was also included in several of the newsletters. The announcement of the recovery premium this February alluded to the fact that NELI would be available for a second year, so I contacted the EEF and asked for the list of schools in Nottinghamshire that had signed up. And I'm pleased to say that 124 schools had signed up, which is 48% of those eligible, which I'm told is higher than the national average, so it feels really positive. Now, the list provided by EEF was really useful because it allowed me to see which schools had not yet taken up the offer. And there's lots of reasons why schools might not have signed up. Some might have just simply missed the deadline. Some might have felt that they didn't have the capacity to engage at that time. And some might not have had background knowledge of NELI. What we noticed was that some of the schools that weren't on the list were actually the targeted schools that we were already working with. So those schools that had RI judgments in areas of high deprivation. And we knew that these were the schools that would benefit from NELI. So I was able then to send personalised emails to those head teachers and also alert other members of the team who met with those senior leaders on a regular basis so they could also promote for the second year scale up. And I continue to update school leaders through briefings, newsletters and training. And I'm really hoping that the percentage in Nottinghamshire increases. The next slide, I'm just going to detail some support that we're currently offering. So as an education improvement team, we're currently supporting 16 targeted schools who signed up for NELI in year 1, because we want to give NELI the best chance of success. So we've committed to 3 remote meetings at each school. An introductory one, a midpoint one at 10 weeks, and one at the end of the programme. We felt it was important to meet with the NELI lead as they were overseeing the programme, and as we've said, it's not necessarily the same person who actually delivers it. So 3 members of our team are carrying out this work. Prior to the first meeting, they gathered some background information so they'd got context and understanding. So the communication and language area of learning and the last Ofsted report gave a really useful overview. Just some examples here. Children join the school with levels of development markedly lower than typical for their age. Communication and language area of learning is lower than national and Nottinghamshire average. So the first meeting allowed for key information to be gathered. Which member of staff had received the training? Had it been disseminated across the early years team so that capacity was being built? Had they completed the language screening? If not, why not? And what needed to happen so that it could be done? How many disadvantaged children were in the group of those identified? And what was the profile of the group? Again, I've got some examples. So some groups had identified children learning through English as additional language, children who had missed schooling due to family issues, some who were shy or anxious. Really interestingly, some children were identified from the screening who wouldn't have been otherwise. So an example here of a chatty child, but the screening showed poor understanding. So I thought that was quite interesting. We also wanted to give staff a chance to discuss the challenges, so advice and suggestions could be offered. Because there was a delay to starting in January due to the lockdown, the programme needs to run into year 1. So had the person who was delivering in year 1 accessed the training so that they were ready to deliver straight away in September? What happened if the person delivering was absent What were the school's contingency plans? Are the children missing the same session when they receive the intervention, or could it be at different times? What happens if a child needs to isolate? Is remote learning possible? And how have you engaged children, and are the parents on board? We also wanted schools to develop ongoing monitoring for impact rather than just end of unit NELI impact measures. We knew that there was going to be other offshoots, such as improvement in phonics, engagement levels, improved behaviour, concentration levels, and so we discussed how to recognise and capture that. Lastly, we asked what next steps there were. So what were their plans for sustaining the intervention? Did they have plans for using it with other children in reception or in other year groups? So to end, in Nottinghamshire, we certainly feel that these supported conversations have helped schools in a much wider context than just NELI. Schools are now reflecting on their implementation of approaches and how they can measure impact. Thank you.
So much, Connie. We've got an amazing array of questions, quite a few of which have sort of been answered as we've gone along, but we're still going to treat them and deal with them properly either now or afterwards. I just want to kick off with one particular one that comes from Sarah Shepherdson, which is a great question, whether the programme can be used for year one pupils who haven't reached their GLDs. I'm going to throw that first at Sarah.
And that's a really good question. So the evaluations of NELI have just been on pupils in reception, and it is specifically designed with that curriculum and age group in mind. But we do know of schools who have been choosing to deliver it in year one, and particularly this year when the current cohort of year one children have had their reception year impacted by COVID. So it's up to the school to choose if they want to do that. We don't know the impact of the programme on year one age pupils, and we would strongly suggest that language screen is used to identify and check that the pupils are working at a level where they require an intervention like NELI.
We've had various questions about early years, which I'm not going to deal with here. There is other funding sources available from DfE, which we'll follow up with you on. And also I should mention that the nursery version of NELI is at an earlier stage of development. It's being trialled at the moment, or the programme is ready to be trialled, I should say, because we had to delay that by a year because of the pandemic. I now want to just come on to another question, which is about how this programme NELI relates to Early Talk Boost, which is another early language programme. I mean, my sense is that NELI is a much more intensive programme, but I'm not sure if either Sarah or Jane wants to come in on whether it's complementary or...
I can take that. So, as well as Early Talk Boost, there's loads of language intervention programmes available on the market. So some language CPD programmes support practitioners with implicit approaches for supporting language. So there's kind of conversational ad hoc moments that you have with children that can kind of model and scaffold language. So we recommend that people still keep doing those kinds of programmes, irrespective of whether they're delivering NELI or not. The bit that's a bit trickier is all the programmes that offer explicit teaching for language development. And Early Talk Boost is one of them, but there's lots of others as well. Early Talk Boost is less intensive. It's 10 weeks and has a small number of sessions. So if Language Screen, for example, highlights that you've got half your class have got language needs, some of them have got really deep language needs, NELI might be the best option for them. And then there's some children who are kind of almost on track. Maybe Early Talk Boost might be the most appropriate for them. They don't need the real intensity of NELI delivery and could maybe access that instead. But it's important to note that NELI is being offered at scale because of its evidence base. It's been evaluated 3 times, so we've got that level of confidence from its replication on finding of that impact. And there's lots of programs that haven't had that same level of evaluation. So if you want to deliver one program, deliver it well, we'd recommend doing NELI first because we've got that confidence in its results.
And on that same sort of theme, there's a question from Jeanette Duff about how NELI sits alongside phonics programs and how how it interfaces with them in timetabling and staffing. Can you say anything about that, Sarah?
Yeah, so NELI is meant to complement, not replace, any kind of literacy or phonics provision. It's just an opportunity for children to revise some of those key letter sound, knowledge and phonological awareness activities. So it definitely shouldn't be used instead of phonics teaching. Children really need that. And the phonics bits are just as I highlight the kind of 3-minute element of the latter half of the programme. So it's just kind of key revision. It's not pre-teaching or in-depth teaching. It's meant to revise what they've learned in the classroom already. And the elements that are chosen as part of the programme follow the letters and sounds programme. So they're kind of order of those graphemes, but they could easily be kind of swapped out and mapped to the order of Read, Write, Inc or other programmes. But the phonological awareness activities are relevant irrespective of what phonics programme you're following.
Okay, that's really helpful. We've had a number of questions on the impact on the rest of the class, but both in terms of whether there's spillover effects and improvement of language and indeed other outcomes for the children who are not in those groups, but also how schools are managing the staffing implications of having teaching assistants focus on those particular small groups of pupils. Can you respond on that point? Sorry, I'm picking on you heavily, Sarah, because you're in the firing line on these.
It's all right. So EF was really interested in that question too, about whether removing children and removing the TA from some of the kind of classroom activities would have an impact on the children who are still in the classroom or other things. So we have done some secondary analysis on the efficacy trial results. So the trial that I was talking about that published in June. What I'm going to talk about is not published yet, but we'd already intended for this to be published. It's just we're waiting for some further analysis and then we can kind of publish it as a batch. But this looked at spillover effects, so looked at the children who didn't receive NELI and see if NELI delivery had a positive impact on them or a negative impact. And actually there was kind of no difference found. So we can't say that supporting, giving teachers and teaching assistants the NELI training has a positive impact on children who there's no evidence that there's transfer, that it supports kind of interactions in the classroom, but there's also no negative spillover. So the fact that TA is removed, there's no negative effect on the children who are left behind, who are kind of still in the classroom. So it really shows that a targeted intervention has that level of support. I think the next step is to study how schools can implement things so that there can be positive spillover effect. And that hasn't really been part of any evaluations yet. And I think the things that Connie was sharing are really interesting and can kind of be the kind of next step for schools as they kind of deliver NELI moving forward, thinking about how they can kind of make sure some of the key learning from NELI is kind of transferred to others.
Connie, do you want to come back in on that?
I just wanted to share really that the catch-up funding that was available to schools, schools can use however they want, and some of the schools have been using catch-up funding to increase existing staff time. So actually there hasn't been any detrimental effect, because actually instead of having 2 part-time teaching assistants, they've increased it to a full-time, so that actually NELI programme hasn't been taking away, so to speak, any members of staff. So I think it's good use of catch-up funding.
Yeah, that's great. There's a great question from Catherine Pape, which I'm going to direct at Victoria, which is about the fact that schools in disadvantaged areas tend to have higher clusters of children with speech, language and communications needs, and the extent to which the way this funding is worked is going to help skew funding towards those schools. Can you say something about that?
I actually haven't seen the question, Josh, but the intention originally was to ensure that that children from disadvantaged backgrounds, the funding was skewed towards that. The programme was run with a target of registering more disadvantaged schools, high FSM schools, so that we could ensure that those children had the support that the NELI programme provides.
No, that's basically where that was going. Catherine's other question about evaluation of the virtual intervention as compared to face-to-face training, I think has already been covered. We have a set of questions which are about what to do about schools that have not completed this year. Sarah, is there anything you can say further on that want to carry on next year? Will they be eligible, for example, for further funding for the next year, or can they just use the program this year? Can you say anything about that?
So obviously there's a group of schools who are probably trying their best to complete as many of the 20 weeks as possible, but it might be that they don't have capacity to continue that into year one. So we recommend to complete as much of NELI as you can as possible this academic year, because we know that even a little bit of NELI will have an effect, because even in the research trials, not all schools completed all 20 weeks. And it still had this really big impact. So complete as much, we want to kind of express the message that schools should complete as much as possible. If schools haven't had the capacity to start, there's a group of schools who have been in contact with the Oxford team to say that they've not had chance to start and want to kind of nominate someone else to train so they can deliver it to the next reception cohort. So if you know of schools like that, encourage them to contact that web address that I had on my kind of timetable slide, the nelly.r@education Oxford, and we can kind of re-engage schools in training so they can deliver it the next academic year. And I feel like you might have asked about another group of schools then. I'm not sure if I covered that.
Well, yeah, there's another question from Sarah Atkinson, which I think we're going to have to make the last one, which is if a school already has a TA who's trained, that was funded previously by the school, can they still sign up for the program?
Yes. Yes.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, but it would be difficult to kind of go through the typical recruitment period approach, perhaps. So if the school looks like it doesn't look like it's eligible, contact our support on the Teach NELI website, and we'll be able to kind of figure it out.
Sure. Thanks so much. Well, look, we've got I can see 50 questions in front of me, which we still need to address, and which are an incredibly rich resource for us to do that. So we will individually respond to everybody, but we're also going to use these questions, as I said earlier, to pull into the FAQ, and we'll circulate that revised FAQ page to everybody as well. So I hope everybody will feel like the questions that have come up for them from hearing these presentations and from hearing some of the discussion will be properly addressed. And as I say, we're going to be continuing to run these sorts of webinars, and I think sort of a learning point for us is probably to leave even more time for Q&A. I mean, the trouble is that very few people have more than an hour at a time to engage in this, but the FAQ page, I think, will be an important way of us addressing, because some really important points have been made and suggestions, and some very detailed questions, I should say, about how this actually works in practice, which we certainly want to deal with in the next webinar, which I mentioned, which hopefully people will have a sign up details from somewhere on the screen. If not, we'll follow that up with people. Just remains me to thank very much everybody who's taken part in this, both as speakers and participants. It's been a really fascinating session, and good luck with the rest of your day. And as I say, we've got anyone who can stay for an extra 5 minutes, we've got a video which will launch as soon as I finish speaking, I hope. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks very much.